This video is going to go over how to design a baseball dice game in Vcarve Pro, then be able to cut this out on our CNC. So this is an image of what the game sort of looks like. We're going to go ahead and design in the field, add some dice, the rules, and the scoreboards into Vcarve Pro. The layout is not going to be like what we see in the image here, but we are able to orient and make it however we would like to have it. So I'm going to start off by going to Vcarve Pro, entering in the job size. As I am in only the design aspect of it right now and not going to the machine just yet, I'm not worried exactly the size of my material. We'll do that at the end of the design. I generally like to have, in the design part of it, have the material larger than what we're going to be. Just kind of gives extra room for design space, and just that's my method. Makes it easier for me to just kind of move things around. So I have a width of 21, a Y of 24, and material thickness, again, really doesn't matter right now. At the end of the design, we could change that to whatever we need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. I'm going to sketch out a rectangle. This rectangle is going to be representing the overall size or proportion that I want the final game to be. Again, we could scale this later, but let's go ahead with a X of 12 and a Y of 16. So this is the overall board of the design. And again, we're just in the design aspect. If your machine needs to cut longer in the X, at the end of the design, we could place the design into the material at the end of what we have here. But let's go ahead and enter in the field, or draw in the field. And to do that, we're going to learn about the rectangle tool, the rotate tool, and a little bit about node editing. So we're going to draw out a rectangle, and we are going to just sketch that out. And I'm going to make that rectangle a square by entering in the X and Y values. And again, we could scale this later and selecting apply. I'm just entering in numbers that I think kind of fit within the design, but once we get the field laid out, we could scale it differently if need be. So that is the square that we're going to draw that is going to be used for the field. Creating the field now, we need to rotate this to create somewhat of a diamond, and I'm going to use the shortcut letter R, or come over to the transform vectors and hit rotate. So if I just type the shortcut letter R, that opens up and is the same as clicking that button. I am now going to rotate this to an angle of 45 degrees, selecting apply, closing the rotate tool, then coming over, selecting that rotated square, typing the letter N for node editing, or coming over to hit the edit objects for node editing mode. We get these black dots, black nodes at the start and the end of each of the line segments. If you right click over top of any black node, you get a set of shortcuts or a set of functions that work. Next to each shortcut, we have next to each function, we have a shortcut letter D. We will be using that. And right-clicking over top of a line span, we get a different list of functions. And we have the to arc, and remembering the shortcut letter A. So we have the right-clicking over the node, we get the functions for the letter D, and that is going to delete that point. And if we remember, that shortcut for the letter A is for an arc. If you hover over top of a line span, we get the little black tilde underneath of the arrow. That means that we are over top of that line span, and we could use those shortcuts, that letter A, to convert that line span to an arc. So once that is done, I'm going to hit node editing again, or the letter N again, to switch back to standard selection, or I could have come over and hit the selection mode under Edit Objects. We now have the basic layout of the field. We'll now use a rectangle tool again to create the diamond. So let's go ahead and sketch that out, and I'm going to enter in a value of maybe 5 by 5. We could change and scale that later. So we'll say OK to that. And if we remember, the letter R is for the rotate tool. I'm going to hit R for rotate and rotate that square 45 degrees and hit apply. Can now move this rectangle, snapping from the lower point to the lower point of that field, and then just using the arrow key to move it up into the field just a little bit. And now we definitely need to resize this. So I'm going to use the just mouse tool to come over the top section here, drag that down to where I believe the field might, the diamond might line up. So that is the basic field that we have now. We now need to create the bases. We might want to create, some of these games use marbles, some of them might use a golf tee. So I'm going to go ahead and plan on using a golf tee for this, and we're going to use a circle to create the hole for where each base needs to be. The diameter is set to be 1/8 of an inch. We might need to make that a little bit bigger, so go 0.18. And I'm going to come over to the diamond and go ahead and select and snapping to each corner of that rectangle. I'm now going to add just a little bit of a design base around each one of the bases, and again just using the circle tool, going to click to match up or snap the center of that circle to the base and scale that out. That gives me a 1/2 inch diameter, and now just clicking on each of the others selects there. I can now use the trim tool to remove the sections that I do not want. That is the basic layout and design of the field and the baseball diamond. When we go to cut it, we might engrave using a V-bit on the line for the lines of the bases and also for the outline of the field itself. Now it's time to create the dugout. We have the home and the visitor, so let's go ahead and just sketch out a rectangle. And I'm not going to worry about size, but looking at the proportions of what the dugout might be to the field that we have drawn. So with that rectangle sketched out, we are now going to go and put some text. And I'm going to click where I want that text to be, and I'm going to enter in home. To get this text centered within the rectangle of the dugout, going to select the letter home or the word home, holding the shift key down, selecting the rectangle, then use the centering tools to center within the rectangle. Now want to create a couple holes for the pegs of each of our players. We really only need to have 4 because only 4 really could be up, 1 on home and first, second, and third base. So I'm going to go ahead and just sketch out a rectangle, or I'm sorry, a circle there. And again, putting in the same diameter that I used for the bases, and apply. I now want to have 4 evenly spaced circles within this area here. I'm going to do that by using and drawing out a line, snapping this line to the center of the first circle, and then just sketching that line out to the length of where I want to have these circles evenly spaced. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and select the circle, Shift key to select the line, coming over to the layout options and using the copy along a line. And I want to, and again, we can see the options are not selected, so we want to copy an object. What object do I want to copy? This circle. And I want to copy along a line. What line do I want to copy it along? That line right there, and we want 4 of those. So now that they are copied, I no longer need this line, and go ahead and delete it. I now want to take this, and we need a duplicate for the visitor side. I'm going to hold the, again, selecting all of it, did a sweep select, selecting it one more time to allow me to be able to move it. This time, as I move it, if I hold the control key down and move it, it's going to make a duplicate copy of what I am moving. So we can now come over and select the home, come up to the text tool, select it, and enter in visitor. And now we could close. So we now have a home and visitor dugout. I do want to rotate each one of these at a 45-degree angle to line up with the baseline. So with the home selected, again, remember the letter R for rotate, or coming over to click the button for rotate selected objects. And we're going to rotate this 45 degrees. Then once that is done, I'm going to come over and rotate the visitor side as well. Now, this side, if we rotate this 45 degrees, it is going to rotate the same as the home did, and that's not the direction we want. We want it to actually rotate a negative 45 degrees. So go ahead and hit apply on that. And I do want to have these evenly centered on the field. And to do that, I'm going to first group each of these dugouts by doing a sweep select or selecting all the objects that I want to group, coming over to the left side, and we are able to hit the little chain link that is going to group those objects together, or we will remember that we have a shortcut to be able to select all the objects and typing the letter G for group. This allows us to select any one of the vectors associated with the dugout to be able to then move it. I'm first going to move it visually where I think it is going to be, just so we could get an idea of where it's going to be. Now we're going to work a little bit on centering it and making sure that we are symmetrical on both sides. So the first thing we're going to do is center the home dugout to the visitor's dugout. We're going to center that vertically. So coming into the center tools and select the object here for a vertical center. So we saw the home dugout move up just a little bit, and now that is centered and aligned perfectly with the visitor side. We now want to center the 2 dugouts centered on the field. And to do that, we're going to select everything that we want to have centered. So we are centering the 2 dugouts on the field. So it is centering all selected objects to the last selected object. So going over into the transform, align, then center the objects. Now, if you remember what I just said, it is centering all selected objects to the last selected object. So what just happened here is it centered the home and visitor to the field. That is not what we want to have happen. So I'm going to do the Control Z, We now need to make another group. We're going to make a group of a group. So we already have a home dugout group and a visitor dugout group. So going ahead and selecting both groups and typing the letter G again groups both dugouts together. This now allows us to select the field, then coming over to the align objects and center horizontally on the field. We saw it shifted over just a little bit to the left. So that is now our basic field layout, our visitor's dugout, and the home dugout. The next thing that we are going to need to create is the scoreboard. The scoreboard is what is giving us the number of innings and obviously the score. So let's go ahead and draw out a rectangle that is going to represent the scoreboard. The sizing and the scale, again, could be modified later. And now coming into the text tool, going to select innings. And then we are going to do visitor. And another text of home. The sizing I'm not too worried about. We are going to scale that, but we want to center all of these together. So with those selected, again, centering tool, I'm going to center them horizontal and then close. Just going to use the arrows, selecting home, use the arrows to move that up into the rectangle for the scoreboard, and just playing with the spacing here just a little bit. We are able to change and use whatever font you have on your computer will work here. Selecting all of that innings and placing it where within the scoreboard and just kind of visually looking at it. There we go. Now with the inning, visitor, and home, I want to sketch out some rectangles or squares that are going to represent the position of each score for each inning. So I'm going to sketch out and draw a rectangle. These rectangles may end up getting removed and deleted later. But let's go ahead and enter in a value of, that's actually not too bad. Make it a little bit bigger maybe. Oh, I like the 0.5. And now just using each of these rectangles, holding the control key down, and it's going to make a duplicate of each one. Well, now going to use the copy in an array or a linear array, because we want to have a total of 9 of these going across the scoreboard. Going ahead and clicking the array. We only need to have 1 of those in the Y direction, and we want to have 9 in the X. And the gap, we have the option to offset or set a gap. I want to have a gap here, and what gap do I want? I want to have the same spacing that I have right here. To know what that is, I'm going to close the selected tools there, go ahead and measure from that point to that point, and we see the distance is 0.0755. So again, selecting the rectangles, using the array, we want to have 9 of them in the X direction, using a gap of 0.7. We don't need to worry about the Y. Go ahead and copy and close. So we now have all of our innings on our scoreboard. Could scale down the width of that board just a little bit. And now we want to create and put our numbers, each inning in each one. So I'm going to go ahead and use the text tool and going to put the height at 0.375, and we will going to enter each one in individually. So selecting that one, just clicking anywhere, going to 2, again, just not worried about exact placing yet because we are going to use the centering tools for this. So I want to center the 1 into this position. And again, 2 to the 2. And there is our scoreboard for the game, and we want to maybe have this centered within the job. So again, if we select the scoreboard and then the total game board using the center tool, this is not what we're going to do, but we're going to show what happens. Everything just kind of gets garbled up and smashed right there in the center. So I'm going to undo that. We first need to have a grouping of what we want to have centered. So selecting everything that I want to center and select group, using the center tools and center within the outer game board and use the center tool. We could locate and move this up or down if we want to move it down onto the field or up into the game piece board itself. So the final process that we want to do is create maybe what the game pieces do or what the dice do. And this is going to be somewhat of a tedious process. And I'm scaling up the rectangle just a little bit. And the tedious process is going to be creating all the text and creating the dice themselves. So maybe I'll first start with creating the different dice that we need, or the die layout, and just using the draw rectangle to create a square. And let's go with 0.5. 0.5, not 5. Then close. This is going to represent the dice. So drawing in a rectangle, and I'm going to snap that right into the center. And it's just kind of sketching out the size, and we could use maybe a V-bit to drill out and come in and hit that. I'm going to draw out a line just so I could kind of help get the placement of this other one centered within that. So I'm using the trim tool to trim that out, using the line tool to then snap each new dice right to the center. So that is the 5, and we will end up using this to duplicate each and all of the others that we need. So this pretty much gives us everything that we would need other than the 6 that we will need to add in some other circles there, and they are really going to be in the center midpoint of those lines there. So drawing in a circle there. So with this combination of lines, we are going to be able to create all the combinations of the dice that we would like to have or we would need. So first, I'm going to copy that, as this is going to be the master, holding the control key down, shifting that off to the right, and we'll just go ahead and do an order and deleting the circles that we do not need. All right. right, so there is the dice. That wasn't as tedious as I thought it was. So we 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Just in case we need that, I'm going to push that off to the side. Now to create the layout of how the game is played and setting what each dice is able to do. So again, let me bring over here. So we're going to create the layout, something that we have right here. So the first is a home run when we roll 2 ones, holding the shift key down and placing that there and creating some text. I'm going to put the text right in here and all right, we are done with that. We are now going to create the double and just placing them all right in here. Now there's a couple ways that we're able to do this. We could do the same thing that we created the rectangles in the scoreboard to get it laid out. And I think that is what I'm going to do rather than making a duplicate copy. So just looking at what we have here, we have the Y and then the X. So we need to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the Y and 3 in the X. So selecting what we have here, I'm going to group that together. I'm not sure if I 100% have to, but it's nice to have that grouped together. And let me undo that first, not grouping, just so we can see what happens. So going into the array, and again, we needed to have 7 of them in the Y direction, 3 in the X, with a gap of, let's go with 1/4 of an inch. Wow, almost, but not quite. We also had the Y at 4, so let's change that to 1/4 of an inch. And we could move that down into our scoreboard. And there we have it, almost. All we have to do now is make a modification to all of the text and get it centered up. So just going to go through and modify each of the text by going into selecting the text and then the text tool, selecting the text, then the text tool, all right, now that we have all of the text, I do see that we have to relocate some of what we have already drawn. So we want to be able to sweep select or select all of the dice here to shift everything to the right just a little bit. Going from a left to right on the sweep selection is going to select everything that is inside and intersecting the window that is drawing out. Or if we go from left to right, only what is entirely within the bounding box is selected. So I'm going to use the arrows on the keyboard to shift it over to the right. I clicked it 8 times and doing the same thing for the other half. 8 times again. We now want to be able to center all of this on the game board. So again, selecting everything using the letter G to group those, selecting the game board, centering within the board, and closing. We now need to update and correct all the different dice. Thinking back, I may have done it a little bit differently if I had to do this again, but let's see how it goes. So go ahead and ungroup these by clicking the letter U or typing the letter U or coming over to the group U. Within each board here, I want to group each of the dots together, and we'll now go in and add and remove, putting them in the right spot. So Control Copy, Control V, paste another set directly on top, selecting the die that I want to have that centered on, clicking Centered, and continuing the process for each of the different scenarios. Going to look at a different way of pulling those together. So with the letter dice 2, going to use the Control Copy as I drag this. So with snapping to the top left, I'll hold the Control key down and snap and make a duplicate copy of each one of these. I can go from center to center. Now what this is doing is creating a vector on top of a vector, which we do not want. So that is, now I'm going to go through and select and delete the duplicate rectangle. So that is giving us the 2s. And I'm going to do the same thing for the 3s. So I need to actually make a copy again of the 3. Holding the Shift or Control key down as I make that motion. And again, coming in and deleting that duplicate rectangle. The only reason I needed to grab that duplicate rectangle was to be able to snap to the endpoint. All right, now they are all laid out. Now, one of the issues that you could possibly run into, and I'm sure everybody has run into it, is the duplicate or overlapping vectors. So in the way that I finished up the copying and pasting, I ended up with quite a few duplicate vectors, and it's mainly the outer side of each of these rectangles. And I could go through and select each one and delete it, or I could just right click and come down to the selection, right click, come down to the selection and select all open vectors. Oh, I'm sorry. Selection all duplicate vectors. And we see they're all there. So I'm just hit the delete on the keyboard. And now I no longer have any duplicate vectors. And we now basically have the final layout completed. I could see somewhere along the line I must have hit the delete on the keyboard and remove the home and visitor. So I will go ahead and put those in just the same way I did in the beginning. I will now just kind of clean up everything that we have there. Remember going to File, Save throughout this whole process, because if I had lost power or any other issues, I would have lost everything that I've done. So we now have the final design that we are able to set up and create a toolpath for. I will show the process of that in a different video. So hopefully this was some help. It was a little bit fun putting this game together and this drawing together. Let me know what you think. Thank you.